Run! Go! Get to the Jibber Jabber! Welcome to a very special episode of the Jibber Jabber Podcast. Nah, I'm kidding. Todd is here from the Weekly Wrestling Ramble. J-Mac is here from the Jibber Jabber flagship. And together, we dedicate our force to fighting evil. Now, we're here actually talking to Dr. Peter A. McCue, author of such books as Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Roads and Paranormal Encounters in Britain's Forests, which, Jordan, you have.
Yes.
You're going to hold it up for the people at home. You guys can go ahead and find this on Amazon, and you can get it on eBay. You can get it on the Kindle store. It's actually it's not a crazy long read, but it is a really good read. Yours is hardcover, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
This one's not, but I suppose I got that one in Kindle version. These books are basically they're accounts by other people that Dr. McCue has kind of looked at, and he tells the story as it was reported and gives his analysis on it with a lot of logic, tiny bit of skepticism, but enough to say, you know what, that's a fair assessment. It's fair to say that that's what goes on in both books. So yeah. Todd's wife actually got him the book for Christmas, and Todd and I, we spend a lot of time talking about, well, Todd basically goes, I read this, get it, Kevin, I get it, and then I tell Jordan about it, right? And what happens is we kind of delve into the paranormal. We've done this previously on the show. You can go back and check out our early episodes, which are the lockdown lore. We've done quite a few paranormal ones by now. If you're a regular listener, which you are, you know this. So it was only right for us to reach out to Dr. McCue and kind of get him on the show to talk a little bit about his books, maybe what's going to happen in the future, and just kind of get his opinion on, you know, what these kind of experiences are like and what he thinks. We also tell a bit of our own experiences that you may have heard previously us talk about on the show. If you're a new listener, hi, and you'll hear all about our experiences here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and come back, because we have more cool content coming up. As always, the Jibber Jabber Podcast, where you'll get anything, primarily movies, and the Weekly Wrestling Ramble, where you get wrestling stuff. But today we go back to paranormal. We kind of dip it in. J-Mac, Todd, are you guys looking forward to speaking to Dr. McCue?
Absolutely, man. I mean, the paranormal's been a bit of not an obsession of mine since I was young, but I've always been very, very interested in it, for UFOs to ghosts and anything weird. I'm up for it. So it'll be an academic's point of view.
I'm a self-admitted big theory, and I think that comes across quite clearly, but that doesn't mean I'm not interested. So
yeah, absolutely. So make sure you hit subscribe. If you're downloading this, maybe leave a review, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. Make sure to check out Peter's books on Amazon. Go ahead and buy it, check it out, let us know what you thought. And
buy it now.
And enjoy this episode, ladies and gents. Dr. Peter A. McCue. Joining us today on Jibber Jabber Podcast is Dr. Peter McCue, author of Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Roads and also Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Forests, which I have just about finished on Kindle.
And there was an earlier book as well.
Was there an earlier book?
Yeah, an earlier book, yes.
All right.
In 2012, Zones of Strangeness.
Right. Is that...
examination of paranormal and UFO hotspots.
Right. See, we actually checked on Amazon and I could only find those two. I don't know if is it on Amazon?
It is there, yeah.
I'll need to check that out.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Roads, because for me that was more ghostly than I found. The forest one so far has been more UFO, and I don't know. For me, we've kind of done a lot of UFO stuff, haven't we? And I found that the chances of a UFO story and a spiritual story, I tend to be more drawn towards the spirit stuff. So I really enjoyed reading that one first.
Yes.
Jordan has just finished Paranormal Encounters on Britain's Forests.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
I did. The story. You've got the Deckman encounter. which is, I mean, that's just down the road. So it's always interesting to hear about that kind of stuff. I know that the Deckman incident is quite well known in the area, but I've never actually read into it in so much detail. So it was good to actually just know that it was more than just, oh, there was a UFO there.
Apart from that night we camped there, actually, there's a big plaque.
Yes.
We actually camped at the plaque. Sadly, the only weird activity we saw was Jordan going to sleep at like 9:30. but it would have been cool to have seen that kind of stuff, because I wouldn't have shied away for that kind of thing. So that kind of brings me to, everybody in this conversation, I don't know about yourself, but we've kind of had experiences ourselves that were not quite natural, but we don't kind of jump on it straight away and be like, this is what it is. So we kind of thought to maybe ask you first before we kind of tell you, have you had any, like, what began your intrigue to the paranormal? Did you have some kind of experience?
Yeah, my interest began when I was a child. I'd say, I found these sort of mysteries intriguing, and I'd like to say perhaps it was purely intellectual, but it wasn't purely intellectual. There's an emotional aspect as well, in the sense that it was intriguing, exciting, but also intellectually challenging, because if these phenomena occur, how do we explain them? And they do call into question existing models of reality. As far as personal experiences are concerned, I'm not sure. I've had one or two experiences, or two or three, that may have been paranormal, but may not have been. They're kind of open to interpretation. Mm-hmm. One simple one, years ago, I was reading about experimental parapsychology, where people would guess, what a card was from a pack of Xena cards with symbols on them, or maybe even playing cards. And I just cut a pack of, I picked up a pack of playing cards, took a grip, and then thought, an image came into my mind of something like the 7 of clubs, and that's what it was actually. And that was probably a 1 in 54 chance, taking into account there are a couple of jokers in the pack. Now it may be that unconsciously I knew that card was there, and I'd forgotten that, but that was intriguing. Another occasion, I came out of the place where I was working in Glasgow, and it was a dodgy area, with a lot of drug addicts breaking into cars and so on. And I just had an uncomfortable feeling as I headed to my car. And sure enough, when I got there, the back quarter window had been smashed, and my radio had been pinched. But that, again, it may not have been paranormal. It may be that I was parking on a street that was, a thoroughfare used by these people, In fact, I tried to park in somewhere else that day, but I couldn't get a parking spot, so I parked on this road. So it was hard to know whether it was a paranormal experience or not. But nothing clear. The other thing that comes to mind was I was on a holiday in the United States. It was a touring holiday of national parks, and I was in Salt Lake City on this occasion, staying in a hotel there, and about 1 o'clock in the morning, from the room above, there were very heavy footsteps, sort of almost like someone walking around with lead boots. And it seemed unlikely at that time of night that there would be work going on. It could have been just an agitated person, maybe having a psychotic breakdown or something. I don't know, or it could have been a ghostly manifestation. I'll never know, but so that's about my tally of personal experiences. But because I haven't had clear-cut, unambiguously paranormal, it doesn't make me think that other people don't. In fact, I think other people do, but I haven't had too many of them myself.
Yeah, you can tell that when reading your books. You can always tell that you're always coming from a place of logic, as well as you'll present the story for what it is, and then you'll give the other side of the coin, and kind of leave it up to the reader to make up their mind.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And that's good to read that, because usually sometimes you can read books, one being about the Stardust Ranch, where everything's like, well, this happened. It's nice to kind of to approach it with that kind of open-mindedness. I know that Todd kind of had a similar scenario where he heard footsteps on the night of his actual wedding. Todd, maybe if you want to kind of tell us that story.
Yeah, I've told it on the podcast before, but my wedding took place in Erf Castle, near Falkirk, and this was about 2015. And because me and my wife were getting married there, we got to stay in. They've got a main complex, which I think is where their stables used to be based originally, back, going back historically. But we actually got to stay in the proper castle, which of course goes back centuries and has a bit of a, maybe not a dark history, but it certainly has histories of, there was a fire that broke out, and there was apparently a nanny and 2 children that burned to their deaths in that area of the castle where the honeymoon suite is. And to be fair, I mean, I'm quite a believer in in all of this. I can't quite explain it, to be honest, but my experience as far as goes, I didn't want to be there anyway. I'd rather much have stayed in the stables where everybody else was, just purely based on the stories I've been told. So I don't know if that maybe plays a part in what I experienced that night. But my wife, who is certainly not as
open-minded.
She certainly wasn't as panicked or fussed about a situation such as that. We got back to our room that night. Obviously, it'd been a long day. I don't know if tiredness plays a part, but we were getting ourselves organised, ready for bed. And the way if you heard somebody walking down the hallway, you'd feel or hear the wood under their feet move. And if somebody arrived at your door, you would know there was a presence there, as if somebody was going to come in. We were midway through conversation, and it was like somebody was walking down the hallway. Now, we didn't think anything else of it, because this is about maybe midnight, around about that time. Everybody's coming back anyway. We thought maybe it's just a guest coming back to the castle, but it was like somebody had walked along and stopped at our door, because you could physically hear somebody outside of the door, and it actually prompted us to stop conversation, because we were practically expecting somebody to knock or walk in. It didn't happen. I checked, and of course, nobody there. So that's already set me on edge. I'm already off to the races.
Yeah.
So I'm every light in the room on, television on, because I'm a total believer in this type of experience. So my wife goes to sleep, and I'm up all night, practically just begging myself to go to sleep. I'm like, just fall asleep, Todd, it'll be morning, and then it'll be done. And I got about as far as about 3 or 4 a.m. My wedding night was a torturous night.
Right.
And
practice for what's to come.
Yeah. Then it was actually passed mostly without incident, if I'm honest. It's probably more myself giving myself the sugleys more than anything else. But the one that I still will remember to this day is the noises of children running down the hallway in the middle of the night. And I could swear it was that's what it was. I fell asleep, thank goodness, but I woke, and my wife was asking me if I could hear the children playing up and down the hallway in the morning as well. So I knew that she'd heard it as well. And that is my experience from Merv Castle. And
Right.
I can't explain it, but I can swear that it happened. I heard these noises as clear as day as we are speaking right now. And I don't have any shame in telling people that, because I know what I heard, but I understand that is not always going to fly with people who maybe are a bit more skeptical than myself.
See where you were, Todd, because I can remember obviously being there. I walked you to your room and was like, hope the ghosts don't get you. In fact, I hope they get you, right? But I think was there another room there? Because it was just like you'd go up the stairs and there's like one hallway. Was there another room there? Could it be possible that there were children in there?
No, absolutely, it could be possible, because there's other people staying in the castle that night, but of course it's still very much the doors are massive in the place, the hallways are very long, but as far as I recall, there was children, of course, on premises, but I don't believe there was anybody staying in the castle, any children in the castle. And if there were, why would they be up around about 3 or 4 in the morning running up and down hallways? It's just more the sound of the footsteps on the floor, as if something's creaking, and just wasn't even so much like laughing over at all as it was just like whispers and things like that. Things that you'd probably go, did that at the time? It's strange, because you think you'd be scared witless, but at the time you actually recognize it's some sort of normal, but it's only when you think more about it that you actually whip yourself into some sort of frenzy.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that. Would you say that maybe Todd's experience was based on him? Because this is kind of, I noticed in your book as well, you kind of point to some people that said they have these experiences with UFOs, or people that do tend to read magazines, at that kind of period of time. Do you think Todd going there knowing the history of this castle and the history of the room he was staying in, do you think that it's very possible that it could have just been something going on in his mind based on his heightened kind of tension?
Well, I think Todd said his wife heard the noises as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So it sounds more, more than that, doesn't it? If she heard the same thing. The other thing is, Todd doesn't have auditory hallucinations elsewhere?
No, I mean, I've never really had, I'll be honest, outside of that incident, there's not been a whole lot of experiences I can point to. I can maybe point to one when I was very young where I might have imagined it, I might have dreamt it, if I'm honest. I was staying in my grandparents' house when I was younger. And it was the first time I didn't have my brother with me. My brother used to sleep in the same room as me everywhere we went because that's just the space we had and things like that. And I don't know if it was the fact I was maybe just freaking myself it was out, but I could swear my bed was shaking. I had a proper bad night where I would refuse to go back to sleep. But that's a long time ago, so I kind of I wrote that off. But I've not really had any sort of real paranormal experiences outside of that, to be honest with you. I mean, I've actually drove some of the roads mentioned in your book. The one that actually drew me to this book was the A70. I drive that, well, when work's been happening, I drive that just about twice a day, and I've drove that in all types of weather, all types of times and at night. And,
sorry, which road was that? Sorry.
A70 Lang Wang. It was the one near Tarbrax.
Yes.
Yes. So I mean, that's how I actually came. I think that's how we came across this book, because I read up about this incident that happened, and I told my wife about it, and she's obviously picked up on that, and she actually got me your book for Christmas.
Yes.
And it's when I explained to Kevin, I said, I've got this book for Christmas, I think you'd be really interested. And he was like, I've already ordered it, it's coming right away, and that's what's led us here. So, but no, I've never had any experiences like that at all. The roads, I mean,
no.
It's always been animals and things like that I've seen. So
I made a mistake. I was at a conference in Edinburgh 2 or 3 years, maybe three years ago. I can't remember exactly the date, but and I bumped into Gary Wood, one of the two witnesses, and there were a couple of discrepancies about the timing of the events, which I mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
And I wanted to clarify that with him. And I was just leaving, and I said to him, "Would it be possible for me to email him some information and get his, ask him some questions?" And he gave me his email address, but he didn't reply. I wish I'd actually just conducted an interview there and then. I've made that mistake before. Some people they don't like writing things. And I don't know, it could have been another reason he didn't want to reply, but I should have just done the interview there and then and taken the opportunity rather than relying on, correspondence or, But that's an intriguing story, just in case anyone isn't familiar with it. It's a couple of chaps were driving to a place called Tarbrax in is it Lanarkshire? Is it North Lanarkshire? I can't remember which county. There are boundaries there. Their experience occurred, I think, in West Lothian, didn't it?
Yes, it goes from. I live in South Lanarkshire, and I drive from South Lanarkshire, and it leads into West Lothian and towards Edinburgh. Yes. So that's
maybe it was South Lanarkshire. Yes. But they were driving past a reservoir, Harper Rig Reservoir, or near Harper Rig Reservoir. I'm not quite sure exactly where they were in relation to the reservoir. And they saw sort of an object hovering over the road, and the driver tried to get away from it by driving under it at speed. But then they sort of seemed to have blacked out. But then they came to the car on the wrong side of the road. But it transpired when they got to their destination, they were much later than they were expected. They thought they were, and they'd lost, in terms of memory, they'd lost a lot of time. And they subsequently underwent hypnotic regression and recalled alien abduction scenarios. Their recollections weren't identical, but sort of broadly similar. Whether that side of that aspect of it's valid, I don't know, but it's intriguing that they both experienced this sort of a period of missing time. So that was an interesting one. It's a well-known case as well. It's often cited.
It's kind of bizarre, isn't it? I mean, I've never lost time, but I've had two proper standout experiences. Not so much with any kind of UFO, but with, well, the first one kind of happened when I was like, I don't know, maybe 10, right? And at this point, TVs were not slim at this point. So you remember those TVs, obviously, they used to be about this kind of thick.
That's right.
And right, and my gran, in your gran's house, they always have something on top of the TV, an ornament or something. So I remember, and this was the very, because when I was a child, I was like, ghosts are not real, otherwise I'd have seen them. The child mentality, right? And because for me, this was that moment where I was like, wow, you know, that moment where you're like, you just kind of switch on and like, so it's very possible, right? And because there's no other explanation, and people have said to me when I've told this story, oh, it could have been this. No, it absolutely couldn't have been, right? There was if you can imagine a candle, right? Just like that. So maybe even a bit bigger. You look at the bottom of it. So the top of this TV would have been about a lot thicker than, like, it would have been longer than that. So you've even had a candle there on that book. The chances of that candle leaving the book without any kind of throw, you would call it impossible, right? So I was so close to this TV, and I was sitting talking to my gran, and I kind of felt this weird energy, almost like, imagine you're an aerial and there's static interference. I felt it. I felt like there was it's a feeling I couldn't really describe, right? And this candle went like, it was almost like something hit this candle and it went right across the room. And I can still hear it in my head now, the sound of something hitting that candle, and knocked it right across the room, right in front of me. And I remember just kind of seizing up and being like, and my gran looked at me, right, and goes, see? Because my gran was always telling me,
Right.
she was always telling me, Kevin, there's these things in the world and whatnot. And I was like, all right, gran, cool, right? And she always said, though, she was like, it's always very heightened when you're here, Kevin, right? She's like, I can feel it more and all this stuff, right? She has all the dream catchers and all that, right? And that day, I was like, oh my God. And I kind of felt some sort of inner peace as a child, like, so when I die, I'm not really dead. And I've carried that throughout, right? So that was my first kind of experience. And I saw it. Other people in the room saw it, right? And a lot of my family are like, oh, they don't want to acknowledge it, right? Because there was a loved one that died fairly young in my family. And obviously they would believe that's probably that person, because we were all together, family were there, you know, and I've read that, you know, when families get together, there's a lot of good energy, and maybe that can attract that sort of thing. So I've had bits and bobs of speaking to mediums and stuff, but I had an experience with one medium who he sent me weird messages. So I was like, I'm not going back to a medium. It kind of put me off. And then maybe about a year ago, was it a year ago, Jordan? I had the most scariest experience that I've ever had, right? And I don't frighten often like that. And I don't ever go, ah, or anything like that. And it was in this very house. I was upstairs sleeping, and a close family friend of ours had just died. It was one of my dad's best friends. And I remember thinking about him and feeling really quite, oh, that kind of sucks. And I remember, again, that same feeling. It's a strange feeling of, it's not uncomfortable, but it's like an awareness, but throughout your skin. I really can't explain it. Do you know what I mean? It's like best way I can explain it is like an aerial. And I imagine what an aerial feels when a signal comes. And I fell asleep. And then for some reason, this urge to wake up, because, you know, when someone's standing over you. And I woke up and looked, and there was a figure of a man staring at me next to my bed, to the point I was like, ah! And my wife woke up screaming, because I was screaming, like, what the fuck? And turned the light on. And I'm like, oh! And my heart's like this. And I'm someone that would, if you told me, Kevin, come to my house at this time, I can actually contact the dead, I would come and be like, let's do this. I'm so intrigued. I'm not someone that would shy away from that. But in that instant, I was like, what the fuck? And I turn around, right, and I look at that side, and it's gone. The light's on, and my heart's going. And my wife's scared, because she's like, he's not making this up. Like, I've never seen him like this. I
suppose a skeptic could say it was what's called a hypnopompic hallucination. You know, a hallucination occurring on the edge of sleep when you're coming out. Hypnagogic, when you're just about to fall asleep. Hypnopompic, when you're on the way out of sleep. But I sometimes get auditory ones. I can sometimes, when I'm sort of waking up, I might hear a phone ring. It's a quick buzz.
Right.
And then I know it's from experience that it's not real, but it might last half a second or something like that. But
I get those as well, kind of. For me, it's bangs. I'll always hear, and then I go like this.
Yes.
And then I'm like, but I'm aware that it didn't happen. So I get up, I turn the light on, and I go in and check on my kids. I'm like, there's nothing banging. That does happen to the point now when I wake up and it came from in here. I can tell the difference between a real bang. So I do get those things. I tend to believe that it probably was some sort of kind of sleep paralysis kind of related thing or something to that effect. There was one time I actually had an experience with sleep paralysis, which is a little bit different. And that's, I'll keep that kind of brief because I know Jordan's got a few things. But one time when I was sleeping in my bed, I stayed at my parents' house at this point. I was still very young. A friend of mine had died, right? Maybe a couple of months before. And I remember thinking that I do that. I'm quite empathetic when something happens or something really bad happens. I think about it probably more than someone else does. I always kind of mull over it and think about, what goes through their mind, where are they now, and all this kind of stuff. I spend a lot of time with it in here. And I remember going to sleep that night and it was just me and my thoughts. And before I knew it, it was like, I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember not being as kind of aware as I was when I was awake. I knew that I was somewhere between sleep and not. And it kind of felt like everything was almost dimmer. Even though I was in a dark room, everything kind of felt dimmer and more like, the best way I can describe it is like this. And I was kind of watching myself and I was aware that I wasn't actually a person, but I was something, but I wasn't a person. I didn't have arms, I didn't have legs. I was more like a consciousness staring down at myself, right? And then just like this, and it almost like being sucked back, it was like I could feel someone shaking me like that. And as I shook, I woke and I was like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? To the point I turned the light on, I was like, what was that? I was like, was that a dream? And I only later I put it down to sleep paralysis. It's because I learned what sleep paralysis was years later through talking to Jordan. So I didn't actually know that was a thing. And I don't even know if that is called sleep paralysis, what I experienced. But those are the three main standard things that have ever happened with me. And I remember going in to meet a medium who owns a place in Bathgate, which is West Lothian, close to Armadale, which was one of those stories in your book. And I went into this woman her whole shop is energy. And she kind of said, the minute I walked in, she was like, oh, wow. And she said something about me being a healer or something like that. She was like, a lot of the energy that goes through you when you naturally insert yourself into someone's situation will heal them. I couldn't quite cipher what that was, but that's the only kind of and when I did go to see another medium who was really good, by the way, really good, talked about conversations I had with a friend who passed away that only he and I would have known. And that's why I'm like, wait a minute, if you're some kind of mind reader, that's really good. But he was like, and they know you're aware they're there. They know you're aware. And I was like, right. I was like, so does that kind of explain some of these weird feelings and stuff? And he's like, yeah, that's just them. So I've tried to kind of puzzle piece what I think goes on in maybe another plane or the paranormal world of what it is. But I mean, I suppose every single person has their own experiences and kind of interprets what the paranormal is. Whether you say the word ghost, but is it really? It's not really a ghost. A ghost is like something like a Casper. To me, it always kind of feels like an energy, like a consciousness that you can kind of connect between. Do you know what I mean? I think some people are more prone to connecting to these energies, and that's kind of, for me, that's the kind of those three scenarios. Do you think those could be linked to any kind of something else? I could be, because it could be absolute craziness. Do you think those experiences are related to something more psychological?
Obviously, I can't say for sure, but on the matter of ghosts, generally, I'm actually skeptical about the traditional idea that they're spirits of the dead. One of the problems, if you look at cases of alleged haunting, recurrent phenomena occurring in, say, a particular location, you'll find that if you look at cases that you find that multiple apparitions are sometimes reported. It's not just one figure. Mm-hmm. There was a case in in Tyneside, I think it was, the mill house at Willington Quay, which had a history of haunting phenomena, and about several, I can't remember how many different types of apparition were reported during the course of these events. Now, the problem with thinking that there's traditional spirit theory, if you only had one apparition, say a figure of a nun or something like that, one might say, well, this is a sort of a discarnate spirit who's somehow become earthbound and hasn't moved over fully into the afterlife. That's the way spiritualists would talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But why would a place have several? As if it's a sort of psychic cobweb trapping multiple souls, which makes me skeptical about that. Another thing that makes me a bit skeptical about the spirit theory are reports, some of which I've mentioned in that book on Rogos, of inanimate objects being seen in apparitional form, a train or a locomotive, cars coming towards a person, and then it disappears from view. And then when the person turns the corner, there's nothing there. There have even been reports of apparitional buildings, and it's this makes me a bit doubtful about the traditional spirit theory. And the trouble is, this spirit theory is just taken for granted by many people. You know, you'll get an organization, it might call itself the Ghost and Spirit Investigation Group or something like that. So the theory is almost embedded into the name of the organization. So while I can't say what these things necessarily are, I'm a bit doubtful, as I say, in some cases or many cases, about the idea of earthbound spirits.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
I'm also a bit doubtful, to be honest, about mediumistic evidence. I mean, even though I think the communications that come through mediums, the information they give is often more accurate than can be attributed to chance, and maybe remarkable. The idea that it comes from the dead is questionable, I think. You know, I think an alternative possibility is that it comes from a kind of trickster intelligence that plays games with us and can be quite deceptive, deceitful, misleading. You know, it's not a very nice thought, really, to think that's the case, but it's something that, you know, could be the case. You know, that you go along, you get a message from your father, your dead father. If your father's dead, you think it's your dad. He comes up with some, you know, remarkable information that only you and he knew. It's enticing, and you know, to think that it is your father. But what if it's not? What if it's some sort of trickster? Another problem with the spirit theory, I won't labor this point too much, but is that it often assumes that the spirits of the dead are keeping tabs on us and have incredible knowledge of what we're doing in our day-to-day life. For instance, if you go along to a spiritualist medium at a meet, let's say you go to someone like Armadale or to a seance, and you're at the meeting, and then the medium picks on you and she says, I'm getting a gentleman, his name is Wilfred, let's say that was your dad's name, you know, and comes out with remarkable information. Now, if that information is really coming from your deceased father, how does your dad know that you're there? I mean, does it mean he's keeping tabs on you 24 hours a day? You know,
I actually saw a meme that had me laughing really bad, and it was like a guy watching porn, and like all his dead relatives are like over his shoulder.
That's right.
Well, and you get to think that, right?
I mean, to be honest, with this spirit idea, the idea that these spirits know so much about us and can you go along to the meeting and communicate with the medium, it does imply that they've got incredible powers of ESP, and or as you say, they even know your masturbatory fantasies.
I mean, think about it this way though. Like, I suppose if that's what the spirit is, it would then, wouldn't it? Maybe it would be a case of like, if I was a spirit and I'm watching my son, and I'm like, well, I know what time it is. I'm just going to kick it with the dog then, right? And then he's like, why is the dog barking? Do you know what I mean?
There was actually one thing I read in your book that absolutely captured my, well, I wouldn't say imagination. It was one of the theories, and I went, wow, that kind of blew my mind to think about it. It was the fact about the living hauntings, about how the fact if somebody thought about a moment in their life and where it occurred, it could possibly be replaying there at a time. I was thinking, I was kind of theorizing it to my wife. I was like, so let's imagine right now that somebody's living in the house where I grew up with me and my brother. If I think about the times, like we had a neighbour who told us about a complaint about kids running up and down their stairs, and the neighbours complained about it. And I went, okay, yeah, that used to happen to me and my brother all the time when we used to run up and down the stairs. The next door neighbours would complain. If I think about that moment, I project that moment, somebody in my old house is currently experiencing me and my brother haunting them, running up and down the stairs. And that kind of really fascinated me, and I thought that's actually one I've never ever heard of before.
Yeah, it has been put forward. There was one, for instance, there's a chap called George Tyrrell, dead now, but who wrote a book on apparitions. He was quite an active player in the Society for Psychical Research, and he argued that paranormal apparitions were engendered by telepathy. And in haunting cases, for instance, you could have a case of someone who had an attachment to a property and keeps thinking about it, and then somehow that person's thoughts affect the people actually living in the house now. It's a bit hard to figure that one out. You can understand why telepathy might exist between people who've got some kind of connection, particularly an emotional connection, a family connection. But if I'm thinking about the house where I used to live when I was alive, if I'm in the afterlife, and you're now living in that house, why should your mind be affected and you hallucinate me? You know, it's a bit, but it has been put forward, that theory, and it's, you know, who's to say it might not? It could be true, I suppose, in some senses, but
sorry, just touch. I used to imagine that. Well, at least, but I'm certainly not qualified or smart enough to say a theory. But my idea was always that again, leading back to what Kevin says about energy, I think that, like, say my wife and I had a screaming match about something in my house where I currently am right now. It's quite a strong event. I was kind of under the idea that, I don't know, these walls kind of capture it, and that can maybe replay it sometime in the future. But then I also think to myself, well, what if the building goes? Does that still remain? It's just too way above my head. But that's kind of what I've always imagined it to be, and it kind of makes me feel a bit more comfortable about it, because the more you think about,
a lot of people they've spoken about the so-called stone tape theory, the idea that the environment can act as a kind of recording mechanism and replay events. There is another theory that one doesn't often hear of nowadays. It was called Carrington's association theory, and his idea was basically that we share a common subconscious mind, and if I live in the house and I associate the house with me and certain ideas, and then you move into the house, because we share this common subconscious mind, ideas that I've linked together, the house and me, will work in your mind as well. And then he suggested that could explain why people in the house might see the ghost of the other person who's associated the house with, been associated with the house. It's a bit hard to believe, because it seems to imply that almost every house should be haunted. You know, if you've got a theory that kind of, why doesn't it work everywhere? Why isn't every place haunted?
They kind of say that that the brain, we only use 15% of what the brain is capable of, and some people may be able to tap into some other kind of part of the brain. And this kind of made me think about a chapter in the one on Britain's Roads, was where the fella fell asleep on his couch and blacked out, and when he came to, he was getting a phone call about his twin brother that was shot.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, they would say that maybe twins have more of an opportunity to kind of share that telepathy. Jordan is actually a twin and had an experience like that. Jordan, can you maybe even tell Peter about your experience with that?
Yeah, the thing is, it wasn't actually my experience. It was my twin sister's experience due to something that had actually happened to me. I sent her a message earlier on and asked her just to kind of send me what happened again, and I'm just going to read it out. Basically, it was I can't remember what time it was exactly, but I know it was late at night, so it might have been into the early hours of the morning. And my car had broken down on the Forth Road Bridge. And my sister knew that something was wrong. Now, what she said to me was, if I can find it, here we go.
Shout out to Heather.
Yep. Said, I woke up at about 12 a.m. and went through to my mum and said, I think there's something wrong with Jordan. I'm getting a bad feeling. She tried to call you, so me, but couldn't get through. She said you were staying at Sharon's, that was my crazy ex, and you will be fine. I couldn't shake it. I felt cold and uncomfortable until about 7 or 8 in the morning. But that was, my phone had died and I was stuck on the bridge, and she knew. And I mean, at that time she lived in Whitburn. Forth Road Bridge is, 19 miles away from there.
Yeah, Armadale's right next to Whitburn.
Yeah.
There's a book, sorry, I was going to say, there's a book called Twin Telepathy by an author called Guy Playfair. I haven't read it. I read an article in a magazine which was sort of based on the book, and there were examples. That's where I think I got the one about the two twins and the man who was murdered by the IRA, and his brother had this kind of experience. But you may find that if you get a chance to look at that book, you may find that of interest.
Absolutely, it's always something that's intrigued me. There's also, this might be absolutely nothing, but when we were both really young, I think we were about 5. She fell and hit her chin off the edge of a concrete step, and she cut herself quite badly under the chin. And in that exact spot, I don't grow any hair.
How weird is that?
It might be a really silly thing, but we always talk about it, and it's a weird thing.
Let's see your bald spot. Oh, it's right amazing! Look,
you see that?
Yeah, and that's exactly where her cut is. That's strange.
It's these weird little things. My other kind of main experience is to do with sleep paralysis, but there's a funny kind of twist to it now. It happened when I was maybe in my mid-20s. It started, and it started off with, the typical kind of you're not able to make any sound, but you're aware of what's going on, and I could feel that somebody was behind me in bed, and or I could feel something breathing on my neck or maybe whispering in my ear, and then it kind of got to the point where I was seeing the kind of classic shadow people in the room. And I thought I was having some kind of like mini strokes or some kind of episode in my brain. It was terrifying, but I'm a guy, so I don't want to get it looked at. I didn't want to go to the doctor, or I didn't even tell my wife about it. But then it was years later, maybe 2 years later, I saw a documentary called The Nightmare, and I found out that this thing was called sleep paralysis, and this is what people can experience. But the thing that intrigues me about it is that so many people see very, very similar things to what I was seeing, even though I had no idea what it was at the time. So it's not like I'd heard about sleep paralysis and then as a result started seeing these things. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that kind of collective hallucination, shared hallucinations, or certainly similar visions.
Yeah, I mean,
sleep paralysis.
Skeptical people would just attribute it to sort of a natural brain mechanism and say there's nothing paranormal about it. But there was a case I looked into some years ago, and it was a woman contacted me, and she I think the basic story was that she'd been widowed about 9 months, and then she started having experiences, I think for the first time, I don't think she'd had them previously, of sleep paralysis, but there were other things happening in the house as well, footsteps, and her late husband had a kind of thing about people leaving switches on unnecessarily. And if he went around the house, he saw a switch left on, he would turn it off. And that started happening. You know, switches would, someone might even be in the shower, and they'd find that suddenly the switch outside the shower had been turned off. There was one occasion, at least, when the switch was turned on, but sort of ghostly phenomena occurring in addition to the sleep paralysis, which kind of makes you think, well, hang on, other people experience some of these phenomena as well. You know, the two sons, for instance, and a visitor to the house I got some testimony from. I followed the case up, and eventually it sort of seemed to die a death. You know, it just sort of petered out, the phenomena. Fortunately, actually, when I became involved, I think the woman wondered whether I was making it worse, because things seemed to pick up a bit. You know, I made a visit, and I think when I spoke to her next, she said the television switched off by itself or something like that. You know, just around that time. And but I don't think she held. You know, she was annoyed with me. I think things did die down, and it may have been coincidental.
Very well could have been.
Another thing about these cases is there's a book called. And I'm trying to think of the name of it, by Darren Nitson, and it's basically his argument is that people investigating or involved in poltergeist cases, they may be drawn in and start experiencing phenomena themselves. It's called Contagion. That's the name of the book, Contagion. Okay. Which is an interesting thought, because you get a lot of these people kind of going out on ghost hunts and all that sort of thing, and it means that if you're dealing with it, and many of these so-called ghost hunts occur at places that probably aren't haunted, they're just haunted by folklore. But if you're dealing with a real case, you know, there's maybe a little bit of a risk that, you know, you go there and you might come home and something may follow you.
Yeah, well, yeah. See, kind of the guy we had on previously, Jamie Korstoffen, he, I mean, you can hear that episode in our archive, right? But he takes people down into, I mean, Greyfriars Kirkyard has well over 1 million bodies in there, right? And the grounds were used almost as a kind of like a, what would you call that? Like
he described it as like a lasagna of bodies just buried on top of each other with layers, because they had it had the Covenanters prison there as well, which was like the first concentration camp of its kind in the world at that point. So yeah, it's just, and well, of course it was different times and then they disposed of their dead.
And to the point where he's out now checking the ground and he finds bones all the time, pieces of human bones, just the way it kind of works. But he has taken, and you can see, even when we done that episode, someone from Australia who'd had a trip to Scotland got in contact and was like, this happened. A lot of the cases that happened were all similar, from different groups of tourists that come in and find that they got a burning feeling, and they go away and there's big burn marks. Jordan, you even had it when you went to see it. There's burn marks on them. He even said he saw someone levitate and be thrown across the room, right? And this guy, I mean, we always kind of, when we chat to people that have these kind of stories, we always kind of, I mean, no one's going to believe that someone got picked up and thrown across a room.
You have to always approach it with a degree of skepticism,
right?
Especially when it gets as big as that.
But when we're speaking to him, he doesn't seem like someone that would talk at his ass, right? And he's a very down to earth, and like he'll call a spade, you know. So I would believe him based on just who he is and our kind of relationship together. And he's like guys, he's like, when lockdown's over, bring all your cameras, come, we'll do it at night, you know. So he's like, I'll show you.
Here's the problem, though. If it was capable of being caught on camera, and I think they would have caught it by now. Look at all the ghost TV shows they've got. Jordan, you were on Most Haunted, for crying out loud. You've seen it firsthand. Yeah. I honestly, I don't know why you can't. The thing is, I believe that something does go on, but that's where I think that the spirit theory is completely blown wide open, because I think somebody must have caught something by now that would have been so much, just so concrete in evidence that even the hardest skeptics, or is it just the case that human beings will always find a way to, I don't know, explain things. I say I'm just waffling here, but yeah.
No, generally speaking, I think the sort of plethora of these television programs like Most Haunted, they're actually doing the whole subject a disservice. I mean, it's almost becoming embarrassing to state you've got an interest in the subject, isn't it? Because of the way they trivialize it, and with dramatic music, dodgy bits of footage, as you say, don't really count for much. Even the names that people call themselves, I mean, it's difficult to know what to call yourself, because if you call yourself a parapsychologist, that's a bit dodgy, because that might give the impression that you're doing experiments in a laboratory. That's how some people use the word parapsychology. If you call yourself a psychical researcher, a lot of people won't know what that means. They might not have heard the term. If you call yourself a ghost hunter, it trivializes it a bit, doesn't it? It also sounds a bit predatory, doesn't it?
I'm gonna find you, right?
I mean, I'm a vegetarian. I don't like killing animals. I don't want to be a hunter. It comes up.
Got me one.
That's another thing. Why is it like? I remember somebody saying this to me, and it made me feel awful stupid, because I was like, "Why is it now?" I mean, you speak about it in your book, actually, about the big cats and the apparitions of animals and dogs and things like that. But not a lot of people. Some people do report them, of course. But why do people, when they report apparitions, it's always of an old person or somebody from a time past? Why is it not somebody like ourselves sitting here in our, why is it always old apparitions that are reported? Why does everything have to be old and in the past? Why can't it be somebody who fortunately passed away yesterday?
I think if you look at probably the real cases, you do get these apparitions that are covering all sorts of ages. I think if you've got the folklore type thing, it'll be, Lady Jane Grey or something like that, or someone in ancient robes and costume. But when you look at what seem to be real cases, you get all sorts of things. Some of the best cases I've heard about have been sort of communicated to me privately, really, or even one or two things I've looked into myself. Where, for instance, I'll give you just one example. A man called Jim Hunter had an experience while he was working as an engineer in the Middle East. He was staying in a hotel in the United Arab Emirates, and he was occupying a suite in the hotel. And one night he woke up and saw a man of Indian appearance, I think, looking at him at the end of the bed. And then the figure walked through the gable end wall of the apartment. And Jim was previously had been quite skeptical about paranormal matters, but he was a bit shaken up and mentioned it to some colleagues the next day and got a bit of stick. Nothing else happened to Jim, but a year later, some graduate engineers came to the hotel, and one of them was Indian himself and occupied a room adjacent to Jim's old suite. And he was disturbed. He woke up in the night and saw this figure, which then walked through the wall into what would have been Jim's suite. That Jim wasn't in that suite by then. And the man insisted on being moved to a different hotel. He wouldn't even accept to move within the hotel. Now, this wasn't a historical figure. I don't know. We don't know. I don't know. I don't suppose Jim knew who the figure represented. But a kind of fairly convincing story in a sense. Two independent witnesses, year apart, say it's pretty much the same thing. Another one of my informants told me an experience he had when he was in the Navy. This was years ago. He was serving abroad, but then he came back to Britain and was temporarily sent to Petrevey in Fife, where there was an installation at the castle, I think it was. And he was working in an underground location, as I think signalling work or something like that. And he had to go down in a lift and along a tunnel. And one day he was coming off duty. He saw a wren, a member of the Women's Royal Naval Service, a second officer coming along, and he held open the door for her and said, "Good evening, ma'am." And she just ignored him and sort of walked on. And he thought to himself that she was stuck up, which was understandable. And subsequently, he heard in the mess, I think it was, or heard from one colleague or colleagues that the tunnel was supposed to be haunted by a ghost of a wren. Now, the wren was quite a young woman, not old or but an interesting, intriguing experience, not the sort of thing necessarily you get in a traditional folklore book, you know, where it would be highwaymen or some aristocratic figure or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I noticed when I was reading your book and the explanations that other people in the field have given as to the reasons for certain things happening, sometimes I was looking at the kind of possible plausible explanations and almost thinking they were too convoluted to have been likely to happen at all. It's like maybe the person did just see a ghost or a UFO, because it's like, oh, maybe they came and talked. I think the one that I read was possibly, it might have been the Deckman incident, the UFO, and they say, well, there's a good chance that the guy might have came in contact with this berry, and maybe it got it on his fingers, and it kind of seeped into his skin.
That's right.
And I was reading it and going, really? You know, it's although it is plausible, it just seems to me, in my mind, more likely that he just seen a UFO.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think some people have kind of institutionalized skeptics. I mean, skepticism is a healthy thing if you've got it in moderation, but if it becomes a kind of fetish, kind of religion, you know, everything is seen through. It's almost like going to church, isn't it? You know, instead of going to a religious one, you get up, put your best suit on, you go to the skeptic chapel or something to hear, and then you hear other people telling skeptical stories, and I mean, there's an organization called Skeptics in the Pub, where people of a skeptical disposition can go along to a pub and people talk, you know, share their skeptical ideas. It's I once kind of came up with a classification of what I called hyperskeptics, people who are excessively skeptical, and I think there were three categories I came up with. One was synthetic hyperskepticism. This is where someone pretends they don't believe in something, and yet they privately do. Imagine someone in the American government knew that UFOs were an unexplained phenomenon, and you know, but they didn't want to admit it, and they wanted to dismiss it as a normal phenomena. And if they promulgated that view, that would be a synthetic skeptic. Then there'd be the delusional skeptic, the person who's so skeptical that they actually believe their own theories, even though they're beyond the realms of reason. You know, they don't match the evidence. And then the third category would be the naive hyperskeptic, maybe someone who's rubbed shoulders with friends who think it's kind of cool to sound extremely cynical and skeptical, and they kind of just assume that the skeptical position is right without really examining the facts. So I think there are elements of, you know, delusion and so on with extreme skeptics as much as there are with extreme believers.
Yeah, I mean, I've always seen myself as a kind of cautious believer. I don't have any real good reason to believe. I've not had an experience where I've gone, right, okay. But I do believe there is something, mainly because in my mind, and scientifically, they say the energy never goes away. It just redistributes in other ways. And so you have to think, well, what happens to the energy that's in you when you die? It doesn't just go, it has to go somewhere. And another thing you mentioned was that people are more likely to experience things when they are setting out to actually experience them, like people that are going on ghost hunts and things like that. They're going in with that mindset that they want to experience something, so there's a higher chance that they will. I've never, as much as I want something to happen, I've still never had that kind of moment, and it pisses me off a little bit because I put so much into it. I've went and gone, I've done the overnight kind of ghost hunts and stuff like that. I did one in Mary King's Close in Edinburgh, which is a really creepy place, but nothing happened to me. But something that annoys me about these tours is that they suggest things to you before you even go in. They'll sit and tell you, now in this room, people have felt scratched, or they've felt that there's been somebody watching them over their shoulder. And sure enough, at least one person every time will go, oh, I felt like there was somebody looking over my shoulder. So, yeah, I've
been on investigations where I've been almost embarrassed to be there because people seemed so kind of credulous in a way. I mean, where you'll get someone pleading plaintively for the ghost to move an object. We're here in spirit of friendship. Please move that marker. If you are present, we are friends.
Yeah.
I mean, you think if you die, you might find better things to do than hanging around a dusty old hall for some person to come along and ask you to move a piece of glass or something.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
to satisfy their curiosity at the afterlife.
It would be quite funny if even like that witchy kind of woman in the book on the Britain's roads, if it's like, here guys, watch this. And all the ghost pals are like, she's like, got them again. Like, I could imagine that seems fairly realistic. I would partake in that.
See, that's what I don't understand about that one, because that's that Bluebell Hill seems to be quite like you described it as a cobweb of activity. That one, that's what I don't understand. I don't believe that a spirit could walk in to a room and go, I'm going to interfere with you now. I don't believe that at all. Like you spoke about it. So the fact that they seem to just wait for cars to come along as well and go, right, there's one.
Yes.
like a police stinger.
Well, that was also said as well, wasn't it? Was I'm sure that was in the book, or did we have a conversation about that? About almost apparitions that are there to kind of. It was with regards to the one in the forests with the owl man with the big beak.
Yes.
Wings,
oh, that's right. Yes.
Right. So he would appear to kind of tell you no, don't proceed, to kind of just to kind of prevent any kind of danger.
That's right. It was an idea I had. I'm not saying it's true, but it's just a sort of speculation. This was a case in case the others aren't familiar with it. It's a church at Old Mornon Church. I think it was in Cornwall, where a number of witnesses had allegedly seen a kind of large owl figure, larger than a real owl, and it kind of frightened them. And it was near the church, which is surrounded on three sides by woods. Now, two of the witnesses were girls of about 14, I think 15. I can't remember. I have to check my book to remind myself of their ages. But they were 14. Camping there and had an experience. Now, you might think to yourself, well, is it safe for two young women of that age to be actually camping out in a place like that, where they might actually be? It's not a particularly remote area. I mean, some passerby with dodgy intentions might have noticed them there. They could have been at risk of being assaulted or something. And it could be that the kind of these apparitions are orchestrated to deliberately frighten people, not in a malicious or evil way, but for their own good,
Yeah.
But it's just conjecture. I also considered that with regard to road apparitions. The problem with road apparitions, though, is that apparitions appearing to drivers on the road, I mean, it could be as a warning not to go too fast or something like that, but the apparitions themselves could be a cause of accidents, could even be cause of fatal accidents for all we know. Someone swerves to avoid an apparitional figure, they could pile into another car. So that, I'm not convinced, although I raised the idea for it's interesting speculation. I don't know whether it's true, and I can see problems with it.
When I was reading the part about the Phantom Hitchhiker, the one that got in and asked the guy, imagine a ghost being like, wait there now, and then they stand you up for ages, and the guy kind of takes off and then sees him further down the road, right? As I was reading that, right, I then went into my kitchen and I was kind of like reading it, and I think you're the same, Todd, or it was Jordan. No, was it you, Todd? It was Todd. We start to really invest in the story, and it kind of makes you feel a bit like, right? And I went into my kitchen, and someone walked by my kitchen window. I was like,
yeah.
To be honest, I'm skeptical about that story. The apparition acted in a rather unapparitional manner, and apparitions aren't usually very talkative, and or if they say anything at all. So I don't know whether that story was a bit of an invention. I wouldn't place too much stock in it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed one thing you said a couple of times in the Paranormal Forest book was that if it lends more credibility to a story if there's more than one person to witness it. Now, you might still get discrepancies between their stories, but you wouldn't necessarily discount it as a lie. It's just memory does.
Because even in courts, in courts, witnesses are known to have, it's through perception. I mean, that's what it said in your book, which kind of makes sense. Here's one for you. So we had John Edmonds, and his writer Bruce.
John Edmonds.
Yeah. So John Edmonds came on, and he's the guy that, if you're unfamiliar, and we done a podcast with him that was really well received. He was on American news all over the place because he said that he fought off aliens with a samurai sword and killed them. So we were like, interesting. So we had him on. We had him on, and we treated the conversation with respect to kind of get his take on what happened. And he said things about speaking to these aliens who had all these answers to the world's issues and stuff. And he also goes on to kind of say that what was that thing that happened, and it was right above his ranch, and everyone saw it, and they denied it at first, and then the government came out, and what was it, the big lights in the sky that could never be explained.
Phoenix? No,
that's it. Mm-hmm. That was right above his house.
Right.
And this is the ranch that had all these going ons. Now we obviously said to him when we were chatting to him, we were like, it does come across far-fetched, and he's like this, right? And this is kind of the media paint him out to be an idiot, right? But when we spoke to him, we found that he didn't come across as someone misingenuine, and we were like, mate, you do know it kind of it sounds crazy. He's like, you telling me? It's like everything's I'm a wacko. He's like, I don't gain anything from it, so you know what I mean. And he had a very, very good career. What was his? He was a psychologist or something.
He was a psychiatrist,
right? So he wasn't someone that was.
And his wife worked for the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe she was a cleaner. He never told us what she worked for the FBI. But she certainly worked for him.
And so the thing is, he gets discredited, but yet people have also seen a lot of the things that he talks about. Now, his writer, who actually lives countries away from him, Bruce, he was on the show as well. We had both of them on to talk about it, and he was like, well, we were going to. He had to take a break from writing the book because the time he spent at the ranch to kind of get a feel for what was going on and writing the book, a lot of stuff had happened to him and kind of had followed him. Did he not say that, Jordan? Right?
Yeah, it basically said that he was starting to get weird experiences of his own just through working on the book. Like the Curse of the Exorcist movie. You're working on a film about the devil, and everything that goes wrong, it must be to do with that.
Yeah,
it might be a similar.
So that's a kind of a scenario where there has been witnesses to a case, but with it being the whole UFO now, where we are in 2021, last year was that the Pentagon came out and said, look, there are things in the sky, we don't know what they are. Like that's actually on file. They came out and they said UFOs do exist. There are things that are in the sky, and they've got. Even if you go into the Joe Rogan podcast, there's an episode he does where he's talking to someone he's a real UFO researcher, right high up, right, and he shows the footage of these things that appear, and they're being picked up by military planes, right, and they can't explain them, their shapes, and they're gone. So we can at least say, right, things are. I mean, if you put aside spirits, the skies definitely have something going on. So it wouldn't be. You couldn't kind of just brush it to the side and say, right, UFOs don't exist, because they absolutely do.
An idea I've sort of toyed with is that UFOs may be transient phenomena. Mm-hmm. In other words, not spaceships that sort of come here from somewhere else, and then when we lose sight of them, they've gone to another place very quickly, or entered another dimension, or gone through time, or something like that. Basically, what a UFO experience, a genuinely paranormal one, is a temporary manifestation, a kind of stage production, a drama, an orchestration. So that means that if that's the case, when the UFO experience ends, the UFO itself ends. It's a bit like a stage prop in a theatre. It gets taken away and packed away. It might be brought out again the next performance, but the UFO isn't an object that exists on a sort of permanent or semi-permanent basis. It's coming back to this idea that some of these phenomena may be orchestrations of some sort of tricksterish or higher intelligence that can, depending on what it wants to do, it might produce a Bigfoot sighting, could maybe produce a big cat experience. Yeah. It might produce a ghost in another case, or in some cases you might get a mixture of them. And I find it interesting that there are cases, some reasonably well-known ones, where you get this kind of overlap of phenomena. And I think it's a mistake with people who are interested, say, in ghosts. If they go to they talk to witnesses about ghostly experiences, not to ask about these other things. I would say it's wise to ask, as a matter of course, have you had any UFO experiences? You may just find that the people have, but they think that the person, the investigator they're talking to is primarily interested in ghosts and won't be interested to hear about the UFO experience, or might even think they're daft if they mention that, so they hold back. So at the end of the day, the investigator comes away thinking it's just a ghost. It kind of almost maintains this image that ghostly phenomena are separate from some of these other anomalies, whereas in fact they may all be kind of intermingled. And I remember a man, I used to work in the health service, and this was a chap, a patient who'd had a lot of odd experiences, and he started telling me about these experiences because I was interested in them, not it wasn't in relation to the problem I was seeing him for, but it was just that I was interested. And but he was actually reluctant to tell me about some things just because there were so many, and he thought that if he admitted to these things, he wouldn't be taken seriously. So he was almost sort of holding back a bit. But his experiences cut across three categories, I'd say: apparitions, poltergeist type phenomena, UFO phenomena.
Sorry, can I just say before, the trickster theory I actually quite like when it comes to UFOs, because 99 times out of 100, when you see a UFO, it's a light in a sky. Now, if the technology exists for the UFOs to travel through dimensions, or even from other places in the galaxy or the universe, they don't need light to see where they're going. The only purpose of those lights would be to make sure that they were getting seen. Yeah. Even our own aircraft, they don't use the lights to see where they're going. They use the lights so that other people can see them. So the trickster theory for me really works there, because it's like, right, okay, we're going to show them this, and they're going to see it. I think the more believable UFO stories either happen during the day, or it can only be seen on kind of night vision, stuff like that. That's just my own personal opinion.
I have seen lights only one time. I was cycling in the morning, and it was very early morning, so the sky was no light pollution. I could see all the stars, and because I was cycling, it was so nice to look at, and I'm quite drawn to those kind of things. I was just kind of like this.
He ran over 9 dogs on the
way. Apparitional dogs, it doesn't count. And I kind of seen this. It was just almost like a star. And it kind of went in like a triangle shape, and then just boom, away. And I remember going, wow, what the hell is that? Straight away, like, oh, it's a UFO. But I was like, it could be any kind of anything. And it's definitely from the sky. I saw it done a strange kind of triangular shape movement, and then just took right off. I've seen shooting stars. I've seen all those kind of cool things. So I know that there's a lot of stuff going on up there, but I couldn't ever say that was a UFO experience, that I've only kind of read about, and spoke to John, and he said that the alien that came into his house that was dressed just like a human said to him, I am an alien, blah, blah, blah. And John then said to him, well, how about we go outside and you show me your spaceship? And he was like, fine. So the alien took him outside, and this massive spaceship just kind of revealed itself above his house. It would be interesting to see you speak to John, because, like I says, you don't. Sometimes you have a conversation with someone and you're like, "It's what?" Right? He didn't come across that way. He was. It wasn't even like he was forcing the information to us. We were asking him questions. He's like, "Well, as crazy as it sounds, this is what happens, and this is it." He says his dog got killed as well by one of the aliens, and he kind of started. He kind of started a war with them because he took one out in his kitchen with a samurai sword, and that kind of prompted the others to come. Now, how the war ended, and he's still at the ranch now, isn't he, right? How it ended was because a greater being of alien came, and John was like, if you take care of these guys, you can do what you want. I'll not fight with you, we'll create and it was like he kind of came up with a truce with one entity of
intergalactic ceasefire,
right? Right, and they take care of the pesky ones that he now can put his sword back above his fireplace. Again, sounds a bit iffy, but when you speak to the guy,
we're being skeptical here.
Right. When you now, here's the thing. Let's look at it from this perspective. Imagine I'm in my kitchen tonight, right? And an alien pops into my kitchen and goes, "Bah! Heard your podcast. You were right about a few things, right?" And starts telling me this stuff. And I'm like, "No way, prove you're an alien." He's like, chop his head off. And he's like, "Right, look, I'm talking and I'm holding my own head. I'm an alien." Anyway, he's got to go. How the hell do I tell someone that and not get branded an absolute dafty? Right? I mean, because there's that. People go under the hypnotic state where they answer, and I've seen it being done. Uri Geller used to do it to people. They put look into the eyes, not around the eyes.
Names now.
Right, but they put you under hypnosis and they ask you questions, and apparently, I mean, you might know more about this, where you will answer truthfully because you're under some sort of, is it hypnosis?
It's like past life regression, isn't it?
Hypnotic regression.
It's controversial, though. There is evidence that people with hypnosis, they can confabulate, and they may then believe their confabulations. So it's not, it's not a kind of idea that it's a truth, a mechanism that will. In fact, I think in some places now that it's hypnotically elicited evidence isn't admissible in court. The idea is that if hypnosis is intrinsically involving things like suggestion and imagination and imagery and so on, and you could subtly or not so subtly influence the testimony of someone, or a person might have a apparent recall of something, and they may actually be more inclined then to believe that really did happen, and even though it didn't. So it's another thing about hypnosis. I used to be involved with hypnosis actually, and is that there's actually, and I presume this is still the case, that there is a debate about whether there is such a thing as a hypnotic state. The traditional view is that you expose the person to a so-called induction procedure, they enter a trance, and as a result of being in a trance, they have certain experiences. But the alternative view, known as the non-state theory, is that what happens in hypnosis is just a group of various ordinary psychological processes that come together, and you don't need the concept of a trance to explain what's happening.
It's a strange. I don't know if any of you guys have been hypnotized, but
someone tried actually, and they failed. They had to tell me to step back down because I wouldn't go under.
Well, I've got a friend who does hypnosis, and I'm quite happy to be. I think you need to be open to it. I think there's some people who are completely closed off. Like, for example, he tried hypnotizing my wife, and she wasn't for it at all. I think it's about letting yourself be vulnerable. But while I was being successfully hypnotized, I was listening to the man's words, and I thought, I'm going to make him look a right fool here, because he's going to ask me to do things, and I'm not going to do them. But sure enough, he would ask me to do things, and I would do them, and that was I felt in control, which I didn't think I would ever do. So yeah, it's when you watch it happen, it looks like they're asleep, and I suppose you appear asleep. But at that whole point, I was hypnotized. I never felt like I was not in control. It's a really strange thing. So was that me put in some sort of trance, like you said there?
As I say, some people don't believe there is a trance. They would say that the idea of a trance is an unnecessary concept. One view, for instance, is that good hypnotic subjects, people who respond well to hypnosis, it's a role rather than an altered state. Some people are better at playing a role than others, and people have a kind of rough idea of what hypnotic subjects do. Maybe the person has a good imagination and can think along and go along with the suggestions and play the role, whereas someone else isn't good at the role playing, or and therefore doesn't fit into the role, and doesn't have such good imagery. There was a study done years ago, and I imagine it's been replicated many times, looking at highly hypnotizable women. I think it was women, and it was found that a lot of them in their daily lives had such rich and intense imagery that what they were doing in hypnosis was simply demonstrating in a certain controlled way what's actually happening in their ordinary lives. For instance, these women they could imagine maybe the smell of coffee, and whereas you and I might sort of vaguely kind of get an image of coffee, when we think about it, these women would actually smell it maybe, or maybe even if they're thinking something sexual, they might even have an orgasm, just by thinking about it, whereas most of us perhaps would need to do something more to get the orgasm. So it may be that people who are called good hypnotic subjects are people who've got these kind of traits and abilities, proclivities. And if you go to a stage hypnotist demonstration, what you see there is that the stage hypnotist selects people from the audience through a series of suggestions. He selects the most responsive to suggestion. Put your hands together. Your hands are now glued together. You cannot pull them apart. And most people can pull them apart, but there will be some people who are so kind of taken by the suggestion, they won't. And the stage hypnotist will select them for further screening, for highly responsive to suggestions. It'll be they who will have up on the stage, who will be jumping around, thinking that they're riding horses and so on. Whereas most people won't be responsive to suggestion, won't be selected. And people then attribute the extreme behavior they see on the people on the stage to being hypnotized, whereas it may, as I say, be more that people are generally varying suggestibility, and so it's not directly connected with the paranormal, this matter, but it's just an aside on the nature of hypnosis. I had a strange experience. It wasn't a paranormal experience, but it was funny in a way, but it was embarrassing at the same time. I had a patient in her 30s who claimed to suffer from agoraphobia, fear of going into public places like supermarkets and so on. And I used to see a number of people with this diagnosis are supposedly agoraphobic, and a lot of them were chasing benefits, where they're more interested in having a letter confirming that they had this thing so they could claim benefit or increase their benefits. But this woman actually seemed genuine. She seemed to, and she wasn't too severe with the problem. And I took her across to the local branch from the clinic where I was working of ASDA. And in the foyer, I said, I'd like you to go into the store. I'd like you to do a little bit of shopping and then meet me here by the magazine rack in about 5 minutes. So I went into the store as well. I got one or two things, came out, and I saw a woman buy the magazines. And I thought to myself, is that my patient? Obviously I'd failed to take note of what the patient really looked like. The age was about right, and I thought it must be, it's a woman in the early 30s, must be the patient. So I just went over and I said, how's it going then? And this woman said, okay. I said, right, I'd like you to go down to the end of the precinct. I'd like you to wander around Menzies for 5 minutes and then report back to me here. So this woman toddled off to John Menzies at the end of the precinct, and then she came back about 2 minutes later to say that Menzies was closed. And just at that point, the real patient came out of Astor. So, It's quite embarrassing. I mean, I realised immediately the error I'd made, and I couldn't explain to this stranger. I'm sorry, I'm mistaking you for this lady who's being treated for agoraphobia because that would be a breach of confidentiality. So I just sort of
just imagine that moment where you're like,
yeah. But the extraordinary thing was that she complied with my order. And I mean, if I'd said, I want you to come back to my flat now with some champagne and we're going to make love. Yeah, sure. You know. It was actually a potentially dangerous situation because she could have, if the policeman had been there, said this man is harassing me or security, or even if she'd had a kind of maybe a thuggish husband or something. Pal, who are you bossing about? You know, the next thing I'm being smacked about, you know.
And then your agoraphobic pal comes back and is like, fuck, this is why I didn't want to go out. This is why I stay indoors.
Yeah.
Just you getting battered into all the magazines.
Yeah.
I can imagine. God, so you used to work with a lot of patients then in regards to kind of seeing them through, is it mental kind of?
Yeah, I was a psychologist, clinical psychologist, yeah, so we used to see a range of patients. But as I say, unfortunately, in fact, the place where I spent the last 10 years or so of my working career, it was a sort of quite poor area in Glasgow, and a lot of the people had problems that related to the poor environment they were in, maybe violent neighbours and that kind of thing. So if they were stressed by that, there wasn't much I could do because the public housing stock was limited, and if they applied for a move, they might not be able to get one. So if you're stuck next to people you're scared of, it's not surprising you're nervous and stressed and tense. And then there were some others, as I say, who were maybe chasing the benefits and so on. But there were people in between, you know, with genuine problems who could be helped. It wasn't down to so much the environment. But
and was it through that you decided, right, I want to have a bit of a change here and maybe start writing some books? What kind of inspired you to write these books that we have?
Well, I've been looking into these paranormal cases for years, and various themes sort of interested me, like the road ghost experiences. A lot of experiences do occur on roads, and I've always liked forests and woods. So that's where the second book came from. I mean, I'm not saying that woods and forests particularly are, have seen more strange activity than anywhere else. I mean, certainly there are quite a few reports of strange things happening in woods and so on, but certainly with the roads, though, there are lots of cases where people have been on the road when they've had their bizarre experience.
Yeah, the one that it actually makes the hair stand up in my back of my neck when I think about it. It's at the end. It's in the brief cases at the end of the forest book, and it's the guy who stops to pick up a girl when she gets in the car. And I can't remember if she doesn't say much, but then he looks in the rearview mirror and she's turned into an old woman.
That's right. Yeah, that. I mean, I can't vouch for that case personally because I got it secondhand from another source which I've cited. But yeah, that. I mean, if that really did happen,
that's horrific.
It's horrific, doesn't it? Yes. Yes, the woman gets into the back and then he looks in the rearview mirror and sees an old hag.
So you're not the hag that was here last night? Yeah, that would be absolutely terrifying. Like, I imagine I would just I'd probably go into shock or something like that, especially if and here's the thing that always kind of makes me think, right, okay, ghosts or spirits, right, always it always feels like the purpose is there to give you a fright, to scare you, right? Now, if I was a ghost or a spirit, say I've just died, and I'm like, right, well, this is how this works. There must be a set of rules or something, because I would be like, Jordan, it's me.
Well, there was a case, a woman wrote to me from Aberdeen, I think it was, and she'd been on holiday. She told me she'd been on holiday in Bulgaria. And staying in a hotel, and I think during the holiday she'd been badly bitten by insects, and I think she was suffering from swelling or pain and so on, and wasn't sleeping well, and it was hot and uncomfortable. But she woke up at night and there was a young man kneeling beside the bed, I think with tan body, I can't remember, I don't know whether he was wearing a shirt, I can't remember now, sort of caressing her, touching her gently. And she didn't feel frightened of this, you know, she felt this figure was a sort of, it wasn't threatening. I mean, whether she felt frightened because she was having a bizarre experience, can't remember for sure, but I'd have to check my sort of notes. But it wasn't an intrinsically frightening apparition. It was almost a kind of soothing kind of thing. I'm trying to think of other cases like that.
It just seems they would be more personal, like, because
Yeah.
And unless, like, when someone passes over and the essence of them remains rather than the personality in the full,
Yes.
right? Because I know for a fact I would be swinging his claymore in his wee man cave. Do you know what I mean? I'd be like, whoa! It's just, that's who I am. So
Yeah.
I can't imagine I'd do the whole stand there and look at him and then transform into a hag. It's just, you know what I mean?
A case I looked at here in Scotland, one of the manifestations was a kind of creepy one, and it comes back to this idea of the trickster. Some phenomena had been going on in the house concerned, and the man who told me this experience, he told me that he used to keep 3 20-pound notes in a metal container in the living room, and one morning he went to get the money and it wasn't there. And he was a bit disconcerted by that and left, came back at lunchtime, I think it was, and there, lying on the coffee table, were 3 20-pound notes, uncreased. You know, it was almost as if something was having a real tease, you know, a creepy one, though, for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this is another thing. I've not really read anything about it in your book or anything. I just want to get your kind of thoughts on it. It's the thought of the spirits of loved ones visiting you in your dreams. I don't know if it's anything that you've ever considered, but it happened to my wife when she was pregnant. We were both convinced that she was having a girl, and it was the night before we went for her scan to find out the sex of the baby. Our gran visited her in a dream and told her that it was a boy, and it was. So it's almost like you go, well, maybe it was just a subconscious mind telling you that, like, listen, it's a boy. But it's a nice image. It's quite comforting to think that they can maybe visit you when you're in the land of Nod.
Well, that kind of, I had kind of spoke to Peter previously about the whole scenario with the 2011 tsunami, and I think there's even a part, there's one of the parts in your book where, you know, when a loved one passes, that there's this maybe a window of time where they can visit their loved ones, because during that time of the tsunami, there were several cases, and I'd mentioned before that on Netflix there's a full hours documentary on it of different people throughout that tsunami who had seen their loved ones, gone up and been like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're all right," only to realise they weren't there, and their bodies were found else time. There's a part in it where there's a guy looking for his mum who was on a disabled bus. She had a wheelchair, and he's going through all these set up hospitals where people are all injured and they're all in beds, and he sees her and she's staring at the window, and he walks up and he's like, "Mum," and she turns to him, and he runs up and he's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're all right," and he puts his arm around her and he gives her a big long cuddle, right? And he sits back and it's someone else. It's not his mum, right? And what the strange thing was is at that very point that he did this was when his mum apparently passed in the bus. And that, I don't know if that kind of relates to what you were saying in the book about, you know, the fella got shot and the twin felt it. There has been many different.
Was it crisis apparition?
Yeah, there's been many times where, and I know people that have said, "Oh, you know, I knew that they were dead because they visited me." Right? They came to me and they said, "You know, everything's going to be all right." There was a case again on Netflix, the family next door where the Watts family murders, and the woman's mum, she lost her daughter, the husband killed them and their children. She was like, "You know, I was ready to kill myself, but at that point she came to me and she said, you know, we're all right where we are and all this." And I don't know if at this point, she didn't know she was dead. You know what I mean? She didn't know straight up that she was dead. But she says she knew within herself, because she suspected the husband straight away, and she was like, nah, she's dead. And she was like, follow the tracking system on his van, and you'll find her, right? And they did, and obviously they found him. They found where the bodies and that were. But she said that she was ready for just ending her life to go and be with her daughter, until her daughter came to her and said, you know. And what's strange about that, by the way, see when you watch that documentary on Netflix, if you watch it and then watch it closer, there's body cams of the cops going into the house questioning the husband, you know, where's your daughter? Certain parts, you can audibly hear stuff, right? One is you hear Chris, which is the name of the husband that killed him, right? You hear it, and you can go on YouTube and all the clips are there, and people will slow them down. And another thing is the officers go upstairs into a closet, and you hear a kid go, ha 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 ha, and laugh, to the point the officers go, is there a toy in here or something that we've just stood on? Did you hear that children's laugh, right? The woman that died was strangled, right? And the child was called Celeste, but for short they called her Cece. And you can hear audibly in this, in the the body cam, you can hear say, "I'm with Cece," and the voice sounds altered, right? She was choked. The voice sounds altered. You can hear all these things, and I'm like, fuck off. And I've rewatched them again and again and again, and I'm like, there is, and you can even see at certain points movement throughout the body cam. If you watch the documentary and look out for these parts, you will hear and see this. But it's easier to go to YouTube and just have the people that are talking about it, you know, did you see that happen? It's all there. I mean, if spirits don't pass, if it's not dead people that are the spirits, I mean, what would you put that down to? The fact that all these different things, the name of the child was said, Chris's name was said out loud, the voice that said I'm with Cece from me and the mum, the voice was altered. I mean, is that a coincidence? Is that something, you know, do you know what I mean? How could you explain that kind of thing?
I suppose coming back to this sort of trickster intelligence, you could say that all of those things could be possible. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting book I read a little while ago by a chap called Cleland. I've forgotten his first name. And called The Messengers. And it's about people's strange experiences with owls or owl-like figures. And one of the stories he tells is of a woman who'd had long years of depression, and she decided one occasion to kill herself. And
it's in your book, yeah.
She was driving to the place of her planned suicide, and an owl, a large owl, appeared, I think, in a windscreen and sort of stared at her. And she felt that she was being told to be patient and that things would get better. And in fact, things did get better, I think, after that. She didn't proceed with the suicide. And there are other interesting stories like that involving these owls, which, I mean, some of the owls are probably not organic owls. They may have been apparitional owls or owls who had been somehow taken over, if they were real animals that had been sort of taken over for the purpose of these representations. But it's very intriguing stories. There's a very creepy story I read or account in a book by a chap called Greg, a book by Greg Long about the Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington State in the USA. And it was a man who was driving home along a sort of a dirt road, and he saw some figures ahead, and they were sort of very thin, looked like sort of aliens. And they sort of moved robotically, and he didn't want to stop, so he gave them a swerve and carried on. And then there was a light flashing behind his vehicle. And then he had the impression of someone in the car beside him, and he instinctively knew it was or sensed it was the figure of a friend of his. And later that day, or within hours, he discovered that person, that the friend, had been shot dead that night in some incident. So he in one experience, he'd had a kind of collection of UFO entities, UFO type of thing of the light, then a crisis apparition, an apparition coinciding roughly with the time of death of the person who's phantom is seen.
I think your book's probably the first one I've ever read that kind of ties them all together. The UFO experience, the apparitions, and the birds and big cats, and again Bigfoot. There's actually this was the first one that Todd kind of put me on. Todd and I kind of go back and forth on different books, and this one has a Bigfoot. Where is it, Todd?
Ben McDewey.
Yeah,
McDewey,
yes.
the big grey man.
There was a story about that man and a friend of his I read, and to be honest, I'm not sure whether I believe it. It may be true, it may not be. But they were supposedly camping on Ben or in the Larry Grew, a pass. I think it was probably the Larry Grew. It may not have been on Ben McDewey itself, but in the vicinity, and they were ostensibly attacked by a kind of big ape type thing, and they retreated the next day and wound up, I think, at the Cairngorm Rescue Centre or something. But I don't know whether that story is true. According to one account, someone from the Cairngorm Mountain Rescue Team, perhaps not still, but said that the story was, I think the person claimed the story was made up, but I don't know whether that was conjecture or whether it was shown to be the case.
He writes in that book quite extensively. There's a full chapter dedicated to that. Of course, there's a full chapter kind of across. He talks about the Black Lady of Lark Hall. He also mentions like poltergeists where he's walked into rooms and there's been furniture on the floor.
Yeah. I mean, it may be that, but that experience in the Cairngorms genuinely did occur as reported. It was just so dramatic. Because it's so dramatic, you naturally kind of, the skepticism is there, I suppose. But I don't know. I mean, it may have happened, may not have done. I'm not sure. But I haven't read the book, but I imagine it's in there. Is it? The full chapter he calls it Terror on Ben McDewey, and he warns at the end of the chapter that not to go to Ben McDewey because whatever is there is very real indeed. And I remember I've been on it twice. Okay, it's fine. Yes.
I climbed it inadvertently with my wife. We went up the Cairngorms one day and just kept going, not knowing where we were going. And then we reached the peak of Ben McDewey, and everybody was saying, "Well done." It wasn't safe at all. It was a terrible day. But we reached the top, and everybody was congratulating us, going, "Well done, you've scaled Ben McDewey," especially if you didn't know you were going up it, which is the second highest peak in Britain. And I was like, "Wait a minute, this is Ben McDewey."
Todd's like, "Where's the lights?"
I'm ashamed to admit that at that point I was my usual self on the lookout.
There was a story I read about an account of someone was on the Cairngorm Plateau. I don't know if it was Ben McDewey itself, and they found that when they were walking, they heard what sounded like sort of noises behind their footsteps, perhaps. And when the person stopped, the noises stopped. But it transpired that the noise was being generated by coffee in a flask in the rucksack. So and as they're walking along, the coffee was splashing about. And then, of course, when they stopped, I had a bizarre experience once I was married at the time, and I was on a ridge in Snowdonia, Western Snowdonia, and my wife and I were going along. We saw a figure coming towards us along the ridge, coming in our direction, and it looked like a giant, and it was quite disconcerting, And but we waited, and when the person came along, and it just turned out to be an ordinary man, and when he came near us, he just looked like a normal size. I think what had happened was that some features of the environment had created a visual illusion, an exaggerated sense of height. And you sort of initially, as I say, he looked disproportionately large, but you can imagine if we'd run away and hadn't actually waited and seen that the man was just an ordinary man, we could have started a legend, couldn't we? The giant of this ridge in Snowdonia.
Yeah. It would be a shame to think that everything we've ever heard, all the folklore, all the tales, everything has a reasonable explanation. Do you know what I mean? It would be a shame to think that everything does. I'd like to believe that there are other realms of energies, of spirits.
Yes.
There are creatures. There are. I mean, it would be quite boring if they didn't.
Yes. I think the evidence suggests that some of these things are maybe true, and I think that something I don't like about some of the hyperskeptics is that when they appear on television, sort of renter skeptic type of people, there's a sort of smug kind of look on the face from the outset, isn't it? It's a sort of I know best, and you people who are being naive and silly, and it's all down to misperception and theory. They'll trot out a kind of, as I think you said earlier, a theory that is, oh no, it was your colleague Jordan was saying, a theory that seems almost more incredible than the idea of it being something paranormal.
It's frustrating as well, but I think, unfortunately, I don't think that at this point we're ever going to see that piece of evidence that shows it. The reason I think that we're never going to have something proven now is because of the technologies that we've got available, even in our own homes. I mean, I could go out and catch something genuine on a digital camera, and then show it to somebody. They'll say, "Nah, that's not real."
That's right. That's right.
But I've not touched it. I say, yeah, but you could have done this and that. I haven't though. And I think that because the technology is there for people to be kind of readily be able to do these things now on their home computers, I think everything's just going to be dismissed straight away. The
other risk is that, let's say you or I or any of us became involved in a really exciting and dramatic case and investigated it, and it received publicity. The next thing is people are going to be tearing into your life, looking for every little kind of foible, you can see attempts to sort of diminish your credibility by, picking up on minor things, being tendentiously selective, and not really being balanced. But so it is a sad reflection on the way things can be, I think, in this field.
I think a lot of skeptics kind of shoo it off because they don't want to believe it. The thought of having to address, well, wait a minute, guys, there are these things, or you could be abducted if you go down that road. To kind of address it and take it seriously means that you've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
The other thing is it gives people a sort of definition and profile if they adopt a hyperskeptical line. If you take an intermediate position, which probably we all do, we kind of a bit skeptical here, but we're inclined to give it the benefit. We're boring in a way for the media. The media aren't going to I'm not going to be invited onto the BBC to talk about this because my views are too wishy-washy in between, in the middle. They want someone with a really kind of strong protagonist viewpoint,
someone that kills aliens in his kitchen with a samurai sword.
Yes, or dismisses it as a load of rubbish, and it comes on with a smug smile. And I had an experience once with a journalist phoned me up it was some story they were doing on the paranormal. And the journalist got a bit of a shock, or the reporter got a bit of a shock, because he thought that because I was I'm not now, but I was a psychologist, that I would be skeptical, I'd be dismissive of everything. And when I started saying, well, actually, I believe in some of this, he was a bit taken aback. And I think the reason was that he'd probably got a false impression of what the average psychologist thinks, because we have well-known psychologists who appear time and time again adopting a skeptical role, and I think people start to think that psychologist equals very skeptical about the paranormal, and which isn't true.
Did you ever have any of your patients come to you when you were, when you being a psychologist? Did you ever have any of your patients come to you and say, these things keep happening, kind of like what the Enfield case, these kids were telling people and police officers that these things were happening, then the mum was like, I can back this up, and then the police officers were like, right, this is happening. Did you ever have anything?
Well, I remember one colleague put me in touch with a patient of his whose problems went back to some extent to a frightening experience she had in Glasgow. She was a girl, a teenager at the time, and they used to work in a cafe, and she and her friend were walking home from the cafe they got on a bus, and then they got off the bus and walked up a sort of lane to the housing estate where they lived, and I think around the time they got off the bus, they saw an object in the sky. which I think they first, or my informant took to be a plane, but then it didn't look like a plane, it looked more a kind of a UFO type appearance, and it started moving in jerks towards them. And they were a bit frightened, and there was a woman walking ahead of them up the lane, and this woman ran back to the girls and grabbed them, and they huddled next to the gates of I think a distillery or a warehouse or something like that. This thing, the patient thought she was going to be abducted or something like that. She was quite traumatized by this. Eventually the object did move away, and then she continued her journey home. But when she got home, she was later than she would have expected. You know, I can't remember now the amount of missing time, but there was an element of missing time. The father was angry with her, I think, for being too late, you know, but she couldn't account for this. But this experience was traumatic, and it left her with a kind of, you know, quite a bit of anxiety, and it lasted for, I think, years. You know, it wasn't a trivial event. And the man I mentioned earlier, who had experiences spanning different categories, I think his experiences creeped him out quite a bit. You know, I mean, he was odd things would happen, and he was living alone in a flat at the time, or a series of flats actually where things happened, but one in particular. He went into a room one day and saw sort of what seemed to be the outline of a figure sitting in a seat, and he kind of left the room and went back later. There was nothing, no one there, and there was a room that always seemed to feel cold. He had a female friend who experienced some phenomena, you know, at least one or two of the places that he lived in as well, and I think he found it quite unpleasant and creepy.
God, I mean, we've all kind of met people that have had experiences, but again, it's one of those things you can never really take the experience for what it is, because there's usually some kind of rational explanation that we could maybe attach to that. I suppose it's one of those things where you really just need to kind of be there and witness that kind of thing, which is always what kind of leads you to believe that maybe there is something. But it's, for us, I mean, we always kind of want to talk to people that have experienced stuff, just to kind of get an understanding of what it was like for them. And there's one part where in your book with the girl's talking about the owl man, and she's talking there's a part where you go on to say that people are like, oh, it could have just been an owl. And one thing that made me think, do you know what, I would believe this woman, was because she's like, look, I know an owl looks like. This wasn't an owl.
It wasn't a bloody owl, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't a bloody owl, right? It was how frustrated she was getting that everybody was telling her what she experienced, and she's like, no, it was a fucking crazy owl man with wings, right? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's things like that, because that's probably how I would, like the whole candle thing. I've had people say, you know, it could have been the wind. No, I've never seen that in my life. I've never seen the wind move a candle. I heard this sound. I heard something hit it. I seen it. I was looking in the direction. It flew. It got hit.
Yeah, sometimes this sort of study can be embarrassing. I've mentioned in the book a place in northern Scotland called Loch Ashy. It's near Loch Ness, and it's in years gone by, it was reportedly the setting for sightings of phantom warriors or soldiers, and also ghostly car incidents. You know, the disappearing car. And according to sort of traditional legend, the phenomena were perhaps most likely to be seen around the 1st of May. And I went up there one night with a fellow member of the Scottish Society for Psychic Research. Private visit, it wasn't a part of the SSPR's activity, but and we arrived about midnight, and unfortunately, where we wanted to go, there was a water treatment plant had just sort of been built, or had recently been built, and there was obviously a security presence there. It was lit up, and my companion suggested that we should go along to this place and just explain what we were doing, you know. And I thought this wouldn't work, you know, if these people on security duty, or a person saw figures coming up the track, you know, in this remote area, you know, semi-remote area at that time of night, you'd probably phone the police. You know, I would probably, you know, I'd probably. So anyway, I kind of thought, okay, well, you sort of half relented, but we started walking down the track, but then we got to a sign which said, I don't know, something like Northern Scotland Waterboard or whatever it was, no admittance. So we turned back. We didn't break the rules or anything. We didn't do anything improper. However, it was too late. Within 10 minutes, the police were there, and it was kind of embarrassing to say that we were there in connection with looking into apparitions and so on. And they took our details, and what's your name, sir, and what you do, you can imagine, what I don't know whether they asked my occupation, and I had a sort of job in the health service, I'm kind of been chasing spooks on near Loch Ashy in the middle of the night,
They were probably like, these guys have got wives, this is where they come, huh?
I suppose the problem is if you're in a rural place like that and you are acting in a way that the people, because they might think you're a poacher or something like that, or there for some nefarious activity. I think some investigation groups would perhaps tell the police, that we're doing an investigation or something like that, and we may be in the area, just so that the police aren't unnecessarily having the time wasted. But it was slightly embarrassing, but needless to say, I insisted on curtailing the night's activities. I didn't want to hang around there any longer and have another visit from the police. I think they were okay about it the first time, but I don't know whether they would appreciate it if they called out cries.
Obviously, we're in lockdown at the minute, but do you do a lot of kind of field research for the subject?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, actually.
Said it, when we're not in lockdown, do you do a lot of field research for this kind of stuff, or do you do a lot of it from home?
I've not a lot, I would say, and I have done some field research, gone to places, some even quite a long way from where I live, to pursue things and get a feel for the place, talk to witnesses. I've done that, but quite a lot of the research is actually done from home. It's getting in touch with people. Actually being on site may not actually tell you a great deal. I mean, it does give you a feel for a place, but it's if you can get first-hand testimony. I mean, take that case from the Middle East, that man who was in the hotel. I've never been to that place, and if I went to that hotel now, years after, probably there'll be nothing for me to learn. But and getting that information from him, first-hand testimony, was quite useful. So it's a mixture of inquiry, try to make contact with people. It's a bit frustrating at times. People, what people are like, they don't reply to communications sometimes. Letters go missing, maybe don't get passed on. And there was one case, for instance, going back to Loch Ashy, I heard a story about a man who was driving home near to his home near there, and a figure appeared in the middle of the road. And his mother told me that it was a woman in a sort of bubble with her eyes and teeth lit up, I think. And he drove through this kind of strange apparition. And I did send her a letter with the request that she send it on to her son. And I was hoping I'd get first-hand testimony, but I never did. So I don't even know whether she passed the letter on. It's that sort of, you get these frustrations.
Yeah, because there's so much potential there.
Yeah, but
it's
it goes with the territory. Really.
Yeah, when I started reading this book, I was like, I need to reach out to this guy. And I was trying to find you online, and I was like, I can't find him anywhere. Do you know, I had to actually, I searched your name, and there was someone in America that works for a university, and I was like, that's not him. And I found the podcast he'd done previously. And so it was one with a woman. And I was like, right, I'm going to have to just be brave here and ask her, look, I'm trying to get hold of Peter McCue. Is there any chance you could kind of show me where to find his email address or something? And then she'd kind of sent me your Facebook, and that's why I was like, God. And that, for me, I find that can be like, because we stumble across a book and we start to read it and think, right, we need to talk to this guy. That's where it kind of begins, the finding of someone, and then are they willing to kind of chat to you? So I can kind of feel your frustrations there, but there's people that you just can't get a hold of there. But so far we've done all right, but it sometimes can take a while. Isn't that right, Jordan?
Yeah. There's nothing to add to that.
Another problem I've found with the subject is that I think sometimes if you're trying to pin people down and get the detail right, clarify things, people can sometimes maybe wrongly assume you don't believe them. You know, and if they'll say something that's a bit ambiguous, and you just for clarification you try and pursue it, and if you keep asking the same question, you know, they might kind of get tetchy about it. You know, misunderstanding your intentions. You know, the intentions are honourable. You're not doubting their experience, but you're just trying to flesh out the detail a little bit more.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I had something else I was going to say. What was it? I had it written down.
Have you got notes, Jordan? So you've got Paranormal Encounters on Britain's roads, Paranormal Encounters in Britain's forests. I think it'd be pretty cool to see something like, you know, Paranormal Encounters in Britain's graveyards, castles. Is there more in the pipeline? Have you got your...
I was sort of vaguely thinking, I've already written about this, but to some extent, but doing one on sort of hills and mountains, not because there's a higher concentration of strange experiences in those places, but you know, they're nice areas to write about and to visit, and there are stories. I mean, they're a little bit sketchy in some respects. I mean, take the Ben McDewey story. It's quite fragmentary, really, and you know, maybe quite a bit of anonymous testimony. Old stories could be open to interpretation, that kind of thing. So
you could actually call that sketchy paranormal encounters in Britain's mountains. And just kind of take it this way a little bit sketchy.
I got a bit of stick from one or two reviewers of the Woodland book. They said it wasn't all that much about forests, but actually it was the publishers who wanted that title,
Right.
Britain's Paranormal Forests. I wanted it to be Paranormal Encounters in Britain's Woodland, but they thought it sounded clunky. You know, it didn't sort of sound good, so they went for Britain's Paranormal Forests. But the problem is that, strictly speaking, when you read the book, a lot of the cases do pertain to woodland, but some of those woods aren't forests. You know, I mean, a wood isn't the same as a forest. All forests are woods, but not all woods are forests. And, but that's just a relatively minor point. But yeah, one on hills and mountains would be, I think, might put something together. I probably need a bit more material than I've got on at hand. But
well, if you need a camera crew to come and film the whole thing. Yeah, we're pretty local.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
once we're not grounded anymore.
Yeah. Once we're allowed out. I mean, I've had a blast reading it. I had finished this book last week, and I started the Forests one 2 days ago, and I'm nearly finished it. So I kind of get that way because I'm now with this. I kind of get used to the way you're telling these stories, and it's good for me because there's, like I say, there's two sides of the coin there. So it will leave me kind of wanting more. So
right.
Is that a thumbs up to the next?
Well, that's very thumbs up. Yes.
A couple books. I mean, that'd be good. I can imagine, you know, especially with the internet and kind of like what we're doing right now via Zoom, you could contact your next subjects and do the Zoom calls. You know, and even release the Zoom calls as a podcast series to go along with the next book, you know?
Yes.
That for me is very interactive, and I mean, that's the kind of thing I would love to see. So do you have plan? I think you're writing something now for the next...
No, I'm not at the moment. But I'm toying with the idea, you know, maybe looking at, you know, putting together material, and if I can get enough material and maybe some new material. The trouble is, you can never please some people. If you bring out the old sort of some of the better known cases, such as Benedict, oh no, not that again, or even mention Rendlesham Forest, some people are a big yawn about that and so on. Actually, I mentioned Rendlesham Forest in the book, the Woods book. But I actually give more attention to more recent reports, you know, of people who go to the forest now, you know, and have come away with reporting experiences, rather than what happened in 1980, you know, when the US Air Force were there.
Yeah.
But yes.
Well, the internet's certainly full of people now giving their accounts. I would say it's probably easier now to get access to people and their stories, and you can kind of flesh out what...
Trouble is, an awful lot of it, you wonder how reliable it is. I mean, there's one story I mentioned very briefly in the book, and it's about a wood in Cumbria, the
one near Brampton.
Brampton, that's right. Yes. Yeah. Something Rig Wood. I've forgotten the name of the wood now, but Milton Rig Wood, I think it is. And an investigation group purportedly spent a night there or spent some time there and had some bizarre experiences. And they referred in their article, the web article, to a railway line and an accident that occurred there some years ago. Of people killed, and they said that the railway was closed. And I actually said in reporting the story, I just said the railway currently now closed. But actually, I went down there about a year ago, or 2 years ago, and I found that the railway line is still active. It's quite a major railway. It's the I think the Carlisle to Newcastle line. So. So that's an example of inaccuracy, which I've repeated, but I got that from the account that I read on the internet.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder whether the people who wrote that story, whether they were even in that wood, or whether they've confused that wood with some other place. I don't know.
You do cover yourself, though. You do say at the start of both books, these may be outdated or somewhat incorrect at the time of you reading this and at the time of the book.
Yeah, well, the internet references, yes, so that's the problem. I mean, with print references, they don't go out of date. But if you've got a website address, with an if it, what it's like. If you go back to it 2 years later, you find it doesn't work. And I've had that sometimes with magazines. I've sent a few things to it. They tend to take a long time to publish them, but to the magazine 14 times. And a couple of my articles that I sent to them took about 2 years to appear. And the trouble with that is that if you've got internet references, they may not be valid by the time an article appears. Yeah. But I cover myself by saying that. It's worth doing that, I think.
And that kind of does it. Get straight away to me as the reader. I'm like, right, it already sets the tone for you're not just running in with claims and stuff. You're always kind of keeping it. Again, on an even playing field, which, I mean, if anybody really wants to read a book that questions something, but questions it also with logic and the right amount of skepticism, I mean, this is the perfect books for that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seriously.
So we've taken up 2 hours of your time. So all we can do is say thanks. I mean, we'd love to have you on again, especially when the next book comes out.
Right, thank you very much.
We'll be pre-ordering it. Again, thanks very much for coming on, and we've had a blast talking to you about these books. I imagine we'll have more questions again the more we read. I'm actually going to go ahead and look for the first book on Amazon. I couldn't find it, but I'm going to go ahead and check that out, and maybe we'll catch up again. I mean, after lockdown's over, we did make plans to go in. I mean, we also we're a film crew as well. We've got all the cameras and all the cool stuff. We were going to go and set up a night where we go and we just, not so much can anybody hear me, but go and spend some time in Greyfriars Kirkyard to see if anything kind of comes about. And the guy that runs it will kind of give us a tour of the place. So we'll just technically be filming a tour of the place rather than going around being like, is anybody alive out there? Right? I mean, if you're up for it, you're more than welcome to come along with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Kind of see what it's like yourself and see if you end up getting thrown about the room.
Just before I go, I saw something funny years ago on, I don't know whether it was maybe before your time in a sense, but there used to be a television program called Beadles About.
Yes, Jeremy Beadle.
Yeah. There was a great one where a woman was set up by her husband or boyfriend, and she was taken to see supposedly a clairvoyant, and it was really an actress dressed up with a microphone hidden, under the headscarf and so on. And of course, the clairvoyant had been briefed about all sorts of things about the woman, and said to the woman, sitting down with the crystal ball, "Now, before we get going, I'm just going to, I can see your cancer or your but And that was exactly right, of course. That impressed the woman. And then she said one or two more other things that impressed her. And then she said, now I want you just to get in the mood. I want you to ask me one or two questions about your house, just to see whether I can get into the groove or something. And she said, what color is my settee? And the husband whispered black, and came into the earphone. It is black. That is right. And then the woman said, I'm seeing something here that I do not like. I'm seeing your husband. He is in a bar with another woman, and he is trying to kiss her. I do not like this. What I'm saying, and when I get angry, sometimes I can project the cosmic energy onto the screen, and there's a television in the corner of the room, and we can see what is happening if we look at the screen. And suddenly the screen lit up, and there you saw the husband in the bar with the next door neighbour, laughing. Seemed to be having a good time, and then of course the husband came to collect her at the end of the session, and the woman kind of started. And then Beadle walks in, and it was a cracker.
Jeremy Beadle.
There was a Beatles about where the UFO had landed in the women's.
That's
bathroom.
right. That's
Yes,
right.
that was the most famous one.
Woman, do you want a cup of tea?
Huge thanks to Dr. Peter A. McCue for coming on. We kind of worried ourselves, like, oh, will we have enough time to get through the stuff we want to talk about? But it's good that he shares the kind of the passion for speaking about all things paranormal, same as we do, and he's given us graciously 2 hours of his time. He's given you guys 2 hours of his time. We hope you guys enjoyed that full conversation. Todd the Big Fierty, Jordan. Did
that conversation do anything to kind of lower your fear of the paranormal, Todd?
You know what? In some ways it did, but let's be honest. If I see something in my room tonight, I'm not going to go, that's fine. It's just a piece of energy.
I have to say, man, we were talking about some creepy shit, and your wife poked her head in at the back, and I shat a brick. Honestly, because I was not expecting it, and it was just like, oh.
That might actually. I bet you, if anybody's watching the YouTube, if you're putting it up on YouTube, that's
of course.
Yes.
You see he peeking at the door.
That's class. It was actually thanks to her that we're here doing this interview, because she got Todd the book for Christmas, which trickled down to us. So big up to Kirsty. As always, guys, you can subscribe.
Back off, you spooky bitch.
As always, you can subscribe to the Jibber Jabber podcast, where you're going to get all the cool stuff weekly. You'll see the wee icon there for the coffee. You can find the link in the description, where you can kick us 20 pence so we can put it towards getting a cappuccino at some point. Don't feel obliged to do it, but it is very much welcomed if you'd like to. Fuck Patreon. So again, thanks very much for tuning in this week. Long episode for you, so we hope that it's. In fact, we hope you're not driving when you're listening to this. Don't drive through any wooded areas, and if you do, contact us and we'll put you on to Mr. McCue.
Don't pick up any hitchhikers wearing old style clothes.
Or any clothes. In fact,
only pick up naked hitchhikers.
If you see the owls, they are definitely not owls. The owls are not what they seem.
No.
Exactly.
That was a blast.
Exactly. Yep. Huge thanks to Peter McCue, and thank you guys for joining us. Again, we will see you next week for Wrestling Ramble and the Jibber Jabber podcast.
And we'll see you at the Royal Rumble.
Yes.
And I'm going to be there.
31st.
And you got no chance.
31st. Be there or be square. Bye-bye, guys.